What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a player versus player breakdown. And so in fantasy football this year, it does seem like there's a pretty clear top three running backs with Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. On pretty much every platform, those are the top three. But there's not a ton of consensus on how those guys are ordered, specifically with the running back 1 and the running back 2 spots. And so it's very possible that you're on the clock at the 102, 103, 104, and you're choosing between, two of these guys or potentially all three of them. Obviously, you want to hit on your early round 1 pick. And so in this video, I'm going to be breaking down these guys' prices on different platforms, going to be breaking down each player individually. And then at the end, I'll be giving my take on how I have these guys ranked. And the point of this video isn't necessarily for me to tell you guys who to draft. It's kind of just to lay out the information. You guys can draw your own conclusions. But we are going to start off here by talking about their ADPs. We have 4 different platforms: Underdog, Sleeper, ESPN, Yahoo. We can actually see across the board, Jahmyr Gibbs is the RB3 in like that pick 4 to 5 range or 4 to 6 range. Saquon is the RB1 on 2 platforms with Sleeper and Yahoo. And then Bijan is the RB1 on 2 platforms with Underdog and ESPN. For the consensus ADP with those 4 platforms, Saquon edges out Bijan. His ADP is 3.2. Bijan Robinson's is 3.5. And then Jahmyr Gibbs is sitting there at 5.1. And so I'll start off by talking about Saquon Barkley here. He is coming off a running back 1 season in points per game, just dominant rushing production across the board. First in carries, rushing yards, breakaway runs, extremely efficient at 5.8 yards per carry. He managed to hit in the touchdown department, even with Jalen Hurts vulturing. So Saquon scored 15 touchdowns. He was only 11th in carries inside the 5 with 13, and only turned 4 of those into touchdowns, which was tied for 18th in terms of, touchdowns inside the 5. Now, you might think like, oh, he wasn't super productive, on the goal line. What that tells me is that he's probably getting a lot of carries at like the 5, the 4, the 3, and then they're getting Jalen Hurts at the 1 and the 2. So it's not that Saquon Barkley is like a bad goal line back. It's just that Jalen Hurts is taking a lot of those, where Hurts was tied for 3rd with carries inside the 5 with 18 and turned 11 of those into touchdowns. And so it is, a good sign that was a concern heading into the year, where what's the touchdown situation going to look like with the tush push? He was still able to get to 15, even with Jalen Hurts, getting over 10 touchdowns inside the 5, just like getting shoved in with the tush push. As expected, the receiving production wasn't anything crazy. This Eagles offense isn't a super high volume passing attack. They're not going to throw a ton to the running backs. So Saquon was targeted 43 times. That was 26th. He had 33 receptions. That was 31st at the running back position. And then he had 278 receiving yards. That was 26th. And then not really all that efficient either, like 15th in a target share, 22nd in yards per out run. Now, I think the biggest concern with Saquon Barkley, and something that I've been starting to get a little bit sketched out about, is his 2024 workload and what his durability, what his efficiency, what his production is going to look like coming off that season where he did handle, a very large amount of touches. And so with this graphic here, these are running backs with at least 400 touches in the last 10 seasons, and then you can see their next season production. So Saquon Barkley, like almost by 50 touches ahead of the second highest guy with Ezekiel Elliott here. You also have their age where they did it. So Saquon, 22.2 points per game last year. Obviously, next year's an unknown. You had Ezekiel Elliott, who was at 21.8 points per game, fell by 2.3 points per game to 19.5. You had Le'Veon Bell at 22.8. He didn't play the next year. He was holding out. You had Joe Mixon in 2021, averaged 18 points per game, fell off like almost 2 points per game the next year to 16.1. You had 3 players that dealt with injuries in the following season and didn't play half the year. That was Derrick Henry and then Christian McCaffrey twice. You did have Derrick Henry was the one guy here that actually improved on his season. Not shocking because the dude is a freak, but was at 19.6 points per game in 2019, bumped that up to 20.8 in 2020. And then Le'Veon Bell took a hit, 26.3 points per game, fell down to 22.8. Obviously still a great season. So just looking at this, obviously the few players with the injuries, not ideal. 3 of the 4 that were healthy, that did play, did decrease in their production. One other thing that does kind of stand out though is that Saquon is kind of on the older end of this group, where CMC was the other 27-year-old that hit that 400 touch mark over a season. And then he was obviously injured the next year. Derrick Henry was the next closest at 26. he was also injured. And it's tough because typically I'm the guy who's kind of fading the people being super concerned about injuries. Like, you'll always get people commenting if someone like was injured last year, it'll be like, oh, they're injury prone, I don't want to draft them. I think more often than not, injuries are just kind of like bad luck. They happen. Like, people thought Saquon was injury prone, right? All of a sudden he comes to the Eagles, takes nearly 500 touches and stays very healthy throughout the entire season. But it is tough, right? Because you do see the production dip. He's, going to be a little bit of an older running back, and you don't want your early round one pick to just break down. So that's the concern. Obviously, the upside is there. He was just the running back 1 in points per game, but something to think about here. And I think you just kind of have to work through whether his upside is high enough, or like if his ceiling is high enough to take on the injury / like regression risk that he does come with. Now, the next player we will talk about here is Bijan Robinson. He was the running back 3 at 20.1 points per game. Did that on like a not crazy opportunity share, 70%. That was 13th highest. He just had very well-rounded usage. He was top 5 in carries, targets, rushing yards, receiving yards, receptions. He was 3rd in red zone touches, 6th in touchdowns, 5th in target share. So he's going to have solid usage on the ground. He's going to be very involved as a pass catcher. And he actually had a pretty slow start to the 2024 season, where if you look at his first 5 games, that's the out of split column here, he averaged 13.5 points per game. Last 12 games of the season, bumped that up to 22.8. And now that can happen with touchdown luck, stuff like that, but it really was a shift in his usage. First 5 games of the season was averaging 17.2 opportunities per game. That's fine, but that's not like that high-end usage we're looking for. In the last 12 games of the season, that gets bumped up to 24.2, which is obviously a much more exciting number. I mean, like a 7 opportunity difference during those 2 stretches. Then we have a 3-game sample size of him with Michael Penix at the quarterback position. Now, he went nuclear during this 3-week stretch. He averaged 26.8 points per game, but it really was just due to hitting in the touchdown department. He scored 6 rushing touchdowns in those 3 games with Michael Penix. So I don't really think like Penix coming in is going to be, amazing for him. I think it'll be fine. Obviously, if Penix plays well, you want that just for like the scoring volume, potentially leading games, having more rushing volume. But I think it'll be fine as long as Penix is acceptable. Bijan will be a very, very solid pick this year. And then the third running back here, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, kind of the consensus RB3 at this point, but he was the running back 2 last year, 21.4 points per game. He did that on a 53% opportunity share. He was barely getting half of the opportunities and was the running back 2 in points per game. He did it on elite efficiency, big play upside, touchdowns, and receiving production. Averaged 5.7 yards per carry, was 2nd in yards per touch, 2nd in yards per reception, 4th in yards per out run, 1st in touchdowns, tied for 1st in breakaway runs, 52 receptions for 517 receiving yards. He was also 4th in red zone touches. I think there's this misconception that like Jahmyr Gibbs is not good near the goal line or he doesn't get those opportunities. That is just not true. Like I said, 4th in red zone touches. He had more attempts inside the 5 than Saquon Barkley and doubled the touchdowns on runs inside the 5. So they were not afraid of giving him the ball near the goal line, and he did produce when he got those opportunities. And we saw last year, you had the pretty drastic splits with and without David Montgomery. When David Montgomery was healthy, Jahmyr Gibbs was very good. 14 games, 18.7 points per game. When David Montgomery missed 3 games, Jahmyr Gibbs just went nuclear. 32.6 points per game in the 3 outings without David Montgomery. And I think the question here with Jahmyr Gibbs is, when David Montgomery's back, how much can you go back to that 3-game stretch usage, right? Where it's like they're splitting almost 50-50. It's super competitive. When you see Jahmyr Gibbs just completely dominate, and you can see he was averaging like over 160 yards from scrimmage in that 3-game sample size, like, are you going to put him back to a 50% opportunity share? Can you put the toothpaste back in the tube, or is he going to rise to, 55, 60, getting a little bit above 60% in terms of his opportunity share? I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. And then in terms of the offensive environment, Ben Johnson is gone. That's not great. The offensive line also did take a hit. They lost Ragnow and Zeitler. PFF actually has them ranked like pretty close to average as the number 13th best offensive line in the league. Now let's compare these three running backs. And I will say that after the 2024 season, I had these guys ranked Saquon at 1, Bijan at 2, Gibbs at 3. The idea was like, all right, Saquon was just the running back 1. He's going to be in a very similar situation as he was last year. So I'll just keep him at running back 1. Then for Bijan, I felt a little bit more confident in his overall workload than Jahmyr Gibbs, where Jahmyr Gibbs was going to be in that split. Bijan really had the upside to just be a complete workhorse like we saw down the stretch last year. My current rankings for PPR, now it does change when we get to other scoring settings, but for PPR, I bumped up Bijan to my RB1. I actually just recently bumped Gibbs up to my RB2, and then I do have Saquon as my RB3 for PPR scoring. And for Saquon, the usage does kind of scare me here, and it doesn't scare me to the point where I'm like, I don't want to draft him. I think he will get hurt. But it's not like there was a massive gap between Saquon's production last year and like Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs. And so if Gibbs and Bijan don't really have that same risk, like, okay, Saquon stays healthy, he averages half a point to a full point per game more than those other two. Like, that's fine. That's not going to be like the difference between me winning or losing my league, most likely. But they just don't come with the same risk of Saquon with the overall usage and like nearly hitting 500 touches last season. And in 2024, Saquon was at that like 22.2 point per game number. I could see both Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs getting there. Now, I will say they're all in the same tier. So I have them as my 102 through my 104. It's possible I'm overthinking this, right? I'm willing to admit that. Like, the dude was just the running back 1. Maybe he'll just stay healthy throughout the entire season. It is possible. But like I kind of talked about with Saquon, it's just how do you balance the risk? Is his upside great enough? And for me, I just think they're all close enough on like their baseline expectations that the risk just scares me off a little bit. Now, if we're talking like half PPR standard, I do think I'm much more willing to put Saquon above Jahmyr Gibbs just because Jahmyr Gibbs does benefit from PPR with his receiving usage. But in PPR, I am currently at Bijan, Gibbs, Saquon. And as of right now, I have him at pick 2 through pick 4. But that is going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know how you guys are ranking these players. Am I overthinking Saquon? Do you agree with me, disagree with me? But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.